Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are exploring a real paradigm shift, something that is fundamentally reshaping how we approach planetary protection. Now, as those of you who follow conservation closely already know, relying exclusively on traditional national parks and heavily guarded nature reserves, it simply won't cut it anymore. The reality of saving the Earth's biodiversity is just way more dynamic than that. So today, we're looking at a concept that's unlocking massive potential to save vital ecosystems globally, basically by recognizing the unsung heroes of the conservation world. Okay, let's dive into this clear, bite-sized roadmap for understanding how we can actually meet this massive global target together. We're going to cover the 30 by 30 target, introduce OECMs, compare them to protected areas, look at the stewards of the land, review the real-world conservation benefits, and finally, discuss identifying and strengthening OECMs. All right, Section 1, the ambitious 30 by 30 target. Let's establish the high stakes here, 30%. Under the recent coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the international community rallied around a massive, specific goal known as Target 3. Basically, it calls on global parties to effectively conserve at least 30% of the planet's terrestrial, inland waters, coastal, and marine areas by the year 2030. Think about that for a second. 30% of the Earth. It's an absolutely monumental commitment. But actually making that a reality? Well, it brings up an immediate mathematical and geographic challenge. The simple geographic reality is that the global network of official protected areas is not enough on its own. While formal reserves, your official national parks, remain an absolute cornerstone of international efforts, we mathematically cannot reach that 30 by 30 target if we only look inside those traditional fenced boundaries. Incredible biodiversity thrives in places that aren't officially labeled as parks. So hitting that 30% demands that we recognize and support the de facto conservation happening outside the park gates. Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, introducing the OECM, the unsung heroes of the conservation world. They are called OECMs, which stands for Other Effective Area-Based Conservation Measures. Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, but the concept is an incredibly clever solution. An OECM is simply a site that delivers the long-term, in-situ conservation of biodiversity, directly complementing our existing protected areas. Essentially, to cut through the jargon, these are places that represent real, de facto conservation taking place right now. They achieve the exact same positive results for nature, just under a different classification. And this brilliantly illustrates what that looks like on the ground. We have biologists actively monitoring wildlife within the Los Amigos Conservation Concession in Peru. You see, OECMs aren't just abstract policy concepts sitting in a binder somewhere. They are dynamic, active spaces where dedicated people are out there monitoring habitats and protecting local ecosystems every single day. Let's move to Section 3, Protected Areas versus OECMs, just to definitively separate the two. So the crucial point is intent. In a traditional protected area, nature conservation absolutely must be the primary objective. That's the fundamental reason the area was created in the first place. But in OECM, it's far more flexible. Conservation could be a primary objective, sure, but it could also be a secondary objective, or even a completely ancillary, unintended result of how the land is managed. Think about it like a giant puzzle. A military training ground managed for defense, or a watershed managed by a city for clean drinking water might inadvertently serve as an incredible sanctuary for local wildlife. Even though the land is managed for a completely different reason, it still successfully delivers effective long-term conservation outcomes. If nature thrives, it counts. Section 4, the stewards of the land. Let's shift our focus to the people actually making this hidden conservation happen. This built-in flexibility completely changes who gets to be a conservationist. It brings vastly diverse groups of actors to the table. We're talking about indigenous peoples, local communities, private sector entities, and various government agencies. For decades, the global conservation narrative was kind of entirely top-down, but OECMs rely heavily on vital, inclusive partnerships with these diverse land stewards, building a much more equitable model for meeting that 30 by 30 mission. The official guidance actually captures this historic shift perfectly. It states, "The world now has an opportunity to better recognize de facto conservation that is taking place outside currently designated protected areas. By formally acknowledging these stewards, whether they are indigenous tribes managing ancestral lands or private landowners maintaining healthy forests, we are witnessing a really historic pivot toward highly inclusive global conservation." Let's move to Section 5, and see how this builds into tangible, real-world impacts for nature. The ecological and social value OECMs bring to the table is just massive. They prove they are just as critical as officially designated national parks. By identifying these areas, we're conserving important ecosystems and crucial wildlife corridors that animals use to migrate. We're supporting the active recovery of threatened species. We're maintaining vital ecosystem services like clean air and water, while enhancing our overall resilience against threats like climate change. And perhaps most importantly, OECMs act as the glue in our landscapes, connecting remnants of fragmented ecosystems together so nature isn't trapped in isolated pockets. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how these exact measures are actively keeping incredible threatened species like the Iberian lynx alive. By recognizing and supporting OECMs on private agricultural lands or community-managed forests where the lynx naturally hunts and breeds, we're making a direct impact. It proves for sure that effective conservation happens wherever humans and nature figure out how to successfully coexist.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, Identifying and Strengthening OECMs. Let's break down the how.
Identifying an OCEM involves 3 structured, rigorous phases at the site level. Step 1 is screening, just to evaluate if a site even has the potential to meet the criteria. Step 2 is consent, specifically free, prior, and informed consent. This step is a revolutionary departure from historical conservation models because it guarantees a rights-based approach, ensuring that indigenous and local stewards agree to this process without coercion. Only after that consent is given do we move to Step 3, a full assessment of the area's biodiversity and governance. But, identification is just the starting line. Once identified, these areas and their human defenders need serious support to thrive long-term. Strengthening OECMs requires legal recognition so their status isn't easily wiped away, and increased financial resources to build capacity. Crucially, it requires actively defending local stewards. In many parts of the world, environmental defenders face severe, life-threatening risks. Protecting these landscapes intrinsically means protecting the very people who have safeguarded them for generations. We've covered a lot of ground today, but I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. What if saving the planet literally meant looking outside the park gates? When we recognize that incredible, life-sustaining conservation can happen anywhere, from a sustainably managed indigenous forest to a local community watershed, it changes everything. So how do you view the natural spaces in your own community now? Are there unsung heroes right in your own backyard? Keep that curiosity alive and keep looking for the hidden conservation all around us. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.